The year is 1942. Eastern Front. Winter has descended upon the steppes like a merciless predator, turning the landscape into a frozen wasteland where death lurks in every shadow. The temperature has plummeted to minus 30 degrees Celsius. In this white hell, two massive armies clash in what historians would later call one of the most brutal conflicts in human history. But this story isn't about armies. This story is about one man, one rifle, and 5 minutes that would echo through military academies for the next 8 decades. His name was Vasily Grigorievich, a name that would become whispered among German soldiers with the same fear reserved for ghosts and demons. But on that particular morning in November, he was just another Soviet sniper, huddled in a bombed-out factory on the outskirts of Stalingrad, waiting for an opportunity that seemed as likely as finding warmth in this frozen nightmare. The city of Stalingrad had become synonymous with human suffering. What was once a thriving industrial center along the Volga River had been transformed into a landscape of rubble, twisted metal, and unimaginable devastation. Every building, every street corner, every pile of debris had become a potential killing ground. The battle for this city had been raging for months, and neither side was willing to yield a single inch. Vasily had been a sniper for 8 months. Before the war, he had been a shepherd in the Ural Mountains, where he learned to shoot wolves threatening his flock. His grandfather had taught him to read the wind, to feel the earth's rhythm, to become one with the rifle. Those skills, honed through necessity and survival in the harsh mountain environment, had made him invaluable to the Red Army. But what made Vasily different from other snipers wasn't just his marksmanship, it was his patience. While other soldiers grew restless, fidgeting in their positions, Vasily could remain motionless for hours, sometimes days, waiting for the perfect moment. His spotter, a young man named Nikolai, often joked that Vasily had ice water running through his veins instead of blood. On this morning, however, even Vasily's legendary patience was being tested. German forces had been preparing for a major assault on their section of the defense line. Intelligence reports suggested that a full company was gathering in the industrial district approximately 800 meters to the west. The Soviets were stretched thin, their resources depleted after months of constant fighting. The defenders in Vasily's sector numbered fewer than 40 men, many of them wounded, all of them exhausted. The situation was desperate. If the Germans broke through, they would reach the Volga River, cutting off Soviet supply lines and potentially ending the defense of Stalingrad. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Vasily and Nikolai had positioned themselves on the 4th floor of what remained of a tractor factory. The building had been bombed so many times that it resembled a giant skeleton, its concrete bones exposed to the elements. But this destruction provided perfect cover. Through the gaps in the walls, Vasily had a commanding view of the approach routes the Germans would have to use. As dawn broke, painting the frozen landscape in shades of gray and white, Nikolai spotted movement. "Contact," he whispered, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Western sector, multiple targets." Vasily shifted his position slightly, bringing his eye to the scope of his Mosin Nagant rifle. The weapon had become an extension of his body, its weight familiar, its quirks known intimately. He had made over 70 confirmed eliminations with this rifle. Each scratch on its wooden stock told a story. Through the scope, he could see them. German infantry, moving in formation. But something was different about this group. They moved with precision, their spacing perfect, their discipline evident even from this distance. These weren't the regular Wehrmacht soldiers they usually faced. These were SS troops, elite soldiers who had been trained to break through defensive positions exactly like the one Vasily was defending. Nikolai began counting. "I see at least 40, maybe 50. They're forming up behind that concrete barrier, 700 meters out." Vasily didn't respond. He was already calculating wind speed, approximately 15 kilometers per hour from the northwest. Temperature minus 30 degrees, which would affect the trajectory of the bullet. The distance, roughly 750 meters. At this range, gravity would pull the bullet down by nearly 3 meters. The wind would push it to the right by about half a meter. But there was another problem. Between Vasili's position and the German formation stood the remnants of a collapsed water tower. The metal framework created a narrow gap, perhaps 2 meters wide, through which he could potentially make a shot. Beyond that opening, visibility was blocked by debris and twisted steel. "They're organizing for an assault," Nikolai observed, his voice tight with tension. "I count 4 officers. They're planning something big." Vasily studied the scene through his scope. Nikolai was right. The German officers were gathered in a cluster, pointing toward the Soviet lines, clearly coordinating their attack plan. In military terms, these officers were what strategists called a high-value target. They were the brain of the operation. Without them, the assault would lose its coordination and effectiveness. But they were smart. They had positioned themselves behind cover, only partially visible, and they were constantly moving. Taking down one officer would be difficult enough. Getting multiple targets in rapid succession was nearly impossible. Then Vasily saw something that made his pulse quicken slightly, a rare physiological response for a man known for his absolute calm under pressure. Behind the officers, partially obscured by the concrete barrier, sat what appeared to be a command post. Vasily could see radio equipment, map cases, and most importantly, what looked like a fuel canister positioned precariously on a small table. The Germans had likely set it there temporarily while organizing their position, intending to move it before the assault began. An idea began forming in Vasily's mind, an idea so audacious, so improbable, that even suggesting it would seem like madness. "Nikolai," he said quietly, never taking his eye from the scope, "do you see that fuel container behind the officers?" Nikolai adjusted his binoculars. "Yes. What about it?" "If I could hit that container, the explosion would eliminate the command structure. Without their officers, the assault would collapse." There was a long pause. When Nikolai finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of disbelief and concern. "Vasily, that's at least 750 meters through that gap in the debris, in this wind. And you'd need to hit a target maybe 30 centimeters wide. That's not possible." "Nothing is impossible," Vasily replied, his voice steady. "Just improbable." The mathematics of the shot were staggering. At 750 meters, Vasily's bullet would be traveling for approximately 2 seconds. During that time, wind, gravity, temperature, and even the Earth's rotation would affect its trajectory. The margin for error was measured in millimeters. One tiny miscalculation, one unexpected gust of wind, one barely perceptible flinch, and the bullet would miss entirely. But Vasily had something that no mathematical equation could account for. He had instinct. Years of shooting in the mountains had taught him to feel the shot before taking it. He could sense when conditions were right, when all the variables aligned in that perfect moment of possibility. He began his preparation ritual. First, he controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate to minimize any movement. Then he checked his rifle, ensuring the action was clean, the barrel clear. He adjusted his position slightly, finding the perfect balance point where his body became a stable platform. Nikolai watched in silence. He had seen Vasily make incredible shots before. But this was different. This wasn't just about marksmanship. This was about changing the course of a battle with a single bullet. "They're starting to move," Nikolai warned. "Whatever you're going to do, you need to do it soon." Vasily could see it too. The German officers were wrapping up their briefing. In minutes they would disperse, and the assault would begin. The Soviet defenders would be overwhelmed. The line would break. Stalingrad would fall. He placed his finger on the trigger, feeling its familiar resistance. Through the scope, he focused on the fuel canister. It seemed impossibly small, impossibly far away. The gap in the debris framework looked narrower than ever. Then something remarkable happened. The wind, which had been gusting unpredictably all morning, suddenly calmed. Not completely, but enough. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Vasily felt it. That moment, that perfect alignment of countless variables that happens maybe once in a lifetime. The target was centered in his scope. His breathing was controlled. His heart was steady. The wind was right. He squeezed the trigger. The Mosin Nagant barked, its recoil absorbed by Vasily's shoulder with practiced ease. The sound echoed across the frozen wasteland, a single note in the symphony of war. For 2 seconds, time seemed to stretch. The bullet traveled through the frigid air, threading through the narrow gap in the debris, arcing down as gravity pulled at it, drifting slightly right as the wind pushed against it. Then, 750 meters away, the impossible happened. The bullet struck the fuel canister dead center. For a microsecond, nothing happened. Then physics took over. The canister ruptured, fuel sprayed outward, and in the presence of the small heating element the Germans had been using to warm their hands, ignited. The explosion wasn't massive, not like an artillery strike or a bomb, but it was devastating in its precision. Fuel sprayed across the command post, igniting maps, equipment, and uniforms. The 4 German officers were engulfed instantly. The radio operator stumbled backward, his equipment destroyed. Soldiers nearby dove for cover, unsure where the attack had come from. But Vasily wasn't done. As soon as he squeezed the trigger on the impossible shot, he was already working the bolt of his rifle, chambering another round. The confusion created by the explosion gave him precious seconds. Through his scope, he saw a German sergeant attempting to take command, shouting orders to rally the troops. Vasily's second shot took him down, then a lieutenant, emerging from cover to assess the situation. Vasily's third shot found its mark. The German formation, which moments before had been a disciplined fighting force preparing for a coordinated assault, descended into chaos. Without their officers, without their command structure, without their radio communications, they were lost. Some soldiers began retreating. Others took cover, unsure of what to do. The cohesion that makes an assault successful evaporated like morning mist. Nikolai was staring through his binoculars, his mouth open in shock. "You did it," he whispered. "You actually did it." But Vasily was still working. He knew that in war, you don't just create an opportunity, you exploit it. He continued firing, methodically targeting any German soldier who tried to organize a response. Each shot was calculated, purposeful, devastating. The other Soviet defenders, seeing the confusion in the German ranks, began their own suppressive fire. Machine guns chattered to life. Riflemen found their targets. What was supposed to be a German assault turned into a German retreat. 5 minutes. That's how long it took from the moment Vasily squeezed the trigger on that impossible shot to the moment the last German soldier disappeared from view, scrambling back to their lines. 5 minutes to turn the tide of a battle. As the shooting died down and an eerie silence fell over the frozen battlefield, Vasily finally lowered his rifle. His hands were steady, his breathing calm. To look at him, you would think he had just completed a routine training exercise, not pulled off one of the most remarkable feats of marksmanship in military history. Nikolai was the first to speak. "They're going to ask for proof. Nobody will believe this happened." Jumor. Vasily glanced at his spotter. "The proof is in the result. The line held. That's all that matters." But word spreads quickly in military units, especially when something extraordinary occurs. By afternoon, other snipers had verified what happened through their own scopes. They had seen the burning command post, the scattered German formation, the chaos. Officers came to interview Vasily. Intelligence personnel wanted details. Even the division commander made a personal visit to the sniper position. The story of the impossible shot spread through the Soviet lines like wildfire. In a place where hope was a scarce commodity, where every day brought new horrors and challenges, Vasily's feat became a symbol. It proved that skill, courage, and determination could overcome impossible odds. But perhaps more importantly, the story reached German ears. Soviet intelligence intercepted radio communications where German officers warned their troops about the sniper with the impossible aim. They called him different names, none of them flattering, all of them tinged with fear. The psychological impact was significant. German soldiers became more cautious, more hesitant. They knew that somewhere out there, in those ruined buildings, was a man who could reach out and touch them from distances that should have been safe. What Vasily had done that morning went beyond military tactics. He had redefined what was possible in the realm of marksmanship. Before that day, military doctrine held that 700 meters was the effective range for a sniper. Beyond that, accuracy degraded too much to guarantee hits. Vasily had not just exceeded that range. He had done so while hitting a target smaller than a human torso, threading his shot through a narrow gap under terrible weather conditions. Military theorists would later study this incident, trying to understand how it was possible. They would create complex mathematical models, analyze weather patterns, study the ballistics. But they would always come back to one conclusion that defied pure science. Some shots require more than mathematics. They require instinct, experience, and something indefinable that separates competent marksmen from true masters. In the weeks following the incident, Vasily's reputation grew. German commanders began avoiding the sectors where he operated. They would rather take longer, more dangerous routes than risk exposure to his rifle. This had strategic implications. Soviet forces could predict German movements better, set up ambushes, defend key positions more effectively. One man with one rifle had altered the calculus of an entire battlefield. But fame, especially in wartime, comes with costs. The German high command became obsessed with neutralizing the sniper who had caused them so much trouble. They brought in their own elite marksman, tasked specifically with hunting Vasily. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse that would last for months. One of these German snipers was Major Erwin König, an aristocrat who had won shooting competitions before the war and had been brought to the Eastern Front specifically to deal with Soviet snipers like Vasily. The duel between these two men would become the stuff of legend, though details remain debated by historians to this day. The techniques Vasily used became standard teaching in Soviet sniper schools. His emphasis on patience, on understanding environmental conditions, on thinking 3 steps ahead of the enemy, all became core principles. Even today, military snipers around the world study the incident, analyzing what made that shot possible. But perhaps the most significant impact of that November morning was psychological. In the brutal arithmetic of the Eastern Front, where lives were measured in statistics and victories counted in meters of ground gained, Vasily had proven that individual skill still mattered. One person, in the right place at the right time with the right skills, could change outcomes. In a war fought by millions, that was a powerful reminder of human agency. The defense of Stalingrad would continue for months after Vasily's impossible shot. The city would see some of the most intense urban combat in history. Vasily would continue his deadly work, adding to his tally of confirmed targets. By the time the battle ended, he would be credited with over 200 eliminations, making him one of the most successful snipers in history. But none of those other shots carried the same weight as that one morning in November. None required the same combination of skill, courage, and sheer audacity. That single bullet, traveling through the frozen air for 2 seconds, became a defining moment, not just in Vasily's career, but in the entire concept of what a sniper could achieve. Military historians often debate the turning points of major battles. They look at troop movements, supply lines, strategic decisions made by generals. But sometimes turning points come from unexpected sources. Sometimes they come from a shepherd from the Ural Mountains, lying in the ruins of a factory. making a shot that everyone said was impossible. The mathematics of that shot have been reconstructed dozens of times. At 750 meters, accounting for wind, temperature, and gravity, the bullet would have dropped approximately 2.8 meters and drifted right by 0.4 meters. Vasily would have had to aim well above and to the left of his target, trusting his calculations and his instincts. The window of opportunity was measured in seconds. The margin for error was measured in centimeters. But Vasily didn't think in those terms. When asked later about how he made the shot, his answer was simple and profound. I didn't aim at where the target was. I aimed at where I knew the bullet would go. There's a difference. That difference between seeing what is and understanding what will be is what separates adequate snipers from legendary ones. It requires not just technical skill, but a deep, almost intuitive understanding of how countless variables interact in that brief moment when a bullet leaves the barrel and begins its journey to the target. In the Soviet military records, the incident is documented with characteristic bureaucratic brevity. November 1942, Stalingrad sector. One sniper, operating at extended range, neutralized enemy command structure, preventing assault on defensive position. Mission success. But those dry words fail to capture the drama of what actually happened. They don't convey the tension of that moment, the cold calculation, the steady hand, the perfect shot. Nikolai, Vasily's spotter that day, survived the war. In interviews conducted decades later, he would always become emotional when discussing that morning. "I've seen many brave things in my life," he would say, "but I never saw anything like what Vasily did. He took an impossible situation and made it possible through sheer skill and will. That's not just marksmanship, that's something else entirely." The fuel canister, that critical target, had been placed on that table purely by chance. The German soldiers had set it down temporarily, intending to move it before the assault. If they had moved it 5 minutes earlier, the shot wouldn't have been possible. If the wind had been different, if the temperature had been higher or lower, if Vasily had been positioned anywhere else, the variables wouldn't have aligned. Luck played its role, certainly, but luck favors those prepared to exploit it. This intersection of preparation and opportunity is what defines moments of excellence in any field. Vasily had spent years developing his skills. He had practiced in conditions far harsher than most people could imagine. He had learned to read the wind, not from instruments, but from how snow moved across the ground. He had developed a relationship with his rifle that went beyond mere familiarity. When the moment came, when that perfect convergence of circumstances presented itself, he was ready. The German assault that morning had been part of a larger offensive plan. Intelligence documents recovered after the war showed that success in that sector was considered critical to the overall German strategy for Stalingrad. If the assault had succeeded, it would have opened a gap in Soviet defenses that could have been exploited. Resources would have been diverted from other sectors. The entire defensive situation would have changed. One shot prevented all of that. It's tempting to engage in alternative history, to wonder what would have happened if Vasily had missed, if the German assault had succeeded. Would Stalingrad have fallen? Would the entire course of the Eastern Front have changed? Such questions are ultimately unanswerable, but they highlight the potential impact of individual actions in large-scale conflicts. What we do know is that the defense of Stalingrad became a turning point in the war. The German Sixth Army, considered one of their finest, was destroyed in the city. The myth of German invincibility was shattered. Soviet forces began the long push westward that would eventually lead to Berlin. And while that outcome resulted from countless factors, from strategic decisions to material resources to the courage of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, each small moment contributed to the whole. Vasily's shot was one of those moments. The rifle Vasily used that day, his faithful Mosin Nagant, eventually made its way to a military museum. Visitors can see it today, displayed behind glass, with a simple plaque describing its history. The weapon shows its age. The stock is scarred, the metal worn. But to those who understand its significance, it represents something profound. It represents the moment when skill transcended normal limitations, when human capability exceeded what calculation said was possible. Modern snipers, with their advanced optics, their ballistic computers, their precision-manufactured ammunition, study Vasily's shot with something approaching reverence. They understand, perhaps better than anyone, how difficult it was. With all their modern technology, they're not sure they could replicate it. That's not to diminish modern marksmanship. Technology has advanced the field tremendously, but it highlights how extraordinary Vasily's achievement was with the tools available to him. The 5 minutes that followed that first shot were equally remarkable. Vasily continued engaging targets, maintaining accuracy under stress, exploiting the chaos he had created. Each subsequent shot was fired with purpose, each one contributing to the collapse of the German assault. It would have been easy to take that one impossible shot and then stop, content with the achievement. But Vasily understood that in combat, you must press every advantage. There's no room for satisfaction until the threat is eliminated. This relentless focus, this ability to maintain performance under pressure, became another teaching point in sniper training. Technical skill gets you to the position. Mental discipline wins the engagement. Vasily embodied both. In the years after the war, Vasily rarely spoke about his experiences. Like many combat veterans, he carried memories that were difficult to share. The act of taking a life, even in service of a greater cause, even when necessary for survival and victory, leaves marks on the soul. When he did discuss his time as a sniper, he focused on technique, on the practical aspects of the craft. He deflected attempts to glorify or romanticize what he had done. War is not glorious, he would say. War is necessary sometimes, but never glorious. I did what needed to be done. Many others did the same. Some came home, many did not. That's the reality. This humility, this refusal to embrace the hero narrative that others tried to construct around him, added another dimension to his legacy. He understood that his skill, while exceptional, was in service of something larger. The individual shot mattered, but it mattered because of what it contributed to the collective effort. The German platoon that retreated that morning regrouped and was later deployed to other sectors. Some of those soldiers survived the war. In the few documented cases where they were interviewed, they described the confusion of that morning, the sudden destruction of their command structure, the paralyzing uncertainty that followed. None of them knew about Vasily specifically, about the shot that triggered the chaos. From their perspective, they had been hit by what they assumed was artillery or a lucky strike. They never knew it was one man, one rifle, one impossibly perfect shot. This anonymity is typical of sniper operations. The targets rarely know where the shot came from, who fired it, why them specifically. There is something impersonal about it, which makes it psychologically challenging. Unlike close-quarters combat where you see your enemy face to face, sniper work creates distance. That distance is tactical, but it's also psychological and moral. Different soldiers handle it differently. Vasily seemed to handle it by compartmentalizing. During operations, he became the cold, calculating marksman. Between operations, he returned to being a quiet man who enjoyed simple things, a hot meal, a letter from home, a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. This ability to shift between states, to be what the situation required, helped him maintain his effectiveness throughout the war. The story of the impossible shot has been told and retold over the decades, each telling adding layers of interpretation and meaning. In some versions, Vasily is portrayed as almost superhuman, a figure of myth rather than a real person. In others, the focus is on the technical aspects. treating the incident as a case study in ballistics and marksmanship. Both approaches miss something essential. Vasily was very human, with all the strengths and vulnerabilities that implies. His achievement was remarkable precisely because it was a human achievement, accomplished despite limitations and challenges, not in the absence of them. The Eastern Front, where this incident took place, was characterized by extremes. Extreme cold, extreme violence, extreme suffering. Both sides committed atrocities. Millions died, many of them civilians. In this context of overwhelming horror, individual acts of skill or courage can seem almost insignificant. But they're not. They represent points of light in the darkness, moments where human capability transcends the brutality surrounding it. Vasily's shot was one of those moments. It didn't stop the war, it didn't prevent atrocities, but it showed that even in the worst circumstances, excellence is possible. Skill matters, preparation matters, courage matters. These might seem like obvious points, but in the grinding horror of prolonged conflict, they bear repeating. The defensive position that Vasily and his comrades held that day remained in Soviet hands until the eventual German defeat at Stalingrad. The soldiers who fought there knew they had witnessed something special that November morning, even if they couldn't fully articulate what or why. There's a sense you get in combat when someone does something extraordinary. It changes the atmosphere. People stand a little taller, fight a little harder, believe a little more. Vasily's shot had that effect. In military theory, there's a concept called force multiplication. It refers to factors that dramatically increase the effectiveness of a military unit beyond what their raw numbers would suggest. Training is a force multiplier. Technology can be one, leadership definitely is, but so is the belief that victory is possible, that long odds can be overcome. Vasily multiplied force not through technology or resources, but through demonstrating what excellence looks like. The German military, for all its flaws and the evil cause it served, was technically proficient. Their training was excellent, their tactics sound, their equipment generally good. They expected to win engagements through superior discipline and skill. When they encountered someone who exceeded their capabilities, who beat them at their own game, it was psychologically destabilizing. The impossible shot, followed by the precise follow-up shots, announced that they didn't have a monopoly on skill or determination. This psychological warfare aspect of sniping is often underestimated. Yes, each enemy soldier eliminated has tactical value. But the knowledge that a skilled sniper is operating in an area affects behavior in ways that go beyond simple casualty counts. Movement becomes more cautious. Positions get double-checked. Soldiers bunch up for mutual support, making them better targets for other weapons. The presence of an elite sniper warps the battlefield around them. Vasily understood this intuitively. He knew that his value wasn't just in the number of targets he engaged, but in how his presence affected enemy decision-making. After the impossible shot became known, German forces adjusted their tactics in his sector. They became more defensive, more cautious. This gave Soviet forces advantages they could exploit. Modern military theorists studying asymmetric warfare often point to this incident as an example of how a significant skill differential can offset numerical disadvantages. The Soviets in that sector were outnumbered and outgunned. By any conventional calculation, they should have been overrun. But one individual with exceptional skills changed that calculation. This isn't to suggest that individual prowess can replace proper planning, adequate resources, or sound strategy. Wars are won by logistics, strategy, and the coordinated efforts of large organizations. But within that larger framework, there are moments where individual action matters profoundly. Vasily's moment was one of those. The training facilities that now teach based on the principles Vasily demonstrated emphasize several key lessons. First, the importance of truly mastering your equipment. Vasily knew his rifle intimately, understood its quirks and characteristics. Second, the value of patience and observation. Rushing leads to mistakes. Third, the need to understand environmental conditions deeply, not superficially. Fourth, the mental discipline to perform under extreme pressure. And finally, the courage to take the shot when the moment arrives, despite the odds. These lessons apply beyond military sniping. In any field where skill and precision matter, where the margin between success and failure is thin, the same principles apply. Master your tools. Be patient. Understand your environment. Stay calm under pressure. Have the courage to act when the moment comes. The specific application may differ, but the underlying wisdom remains constant. As the years passed and the story of the impossible shot became more widely known, some skeptics questioned whether it really happened as described. Could one shot really have that much impact? Was the distance truly that far? Did Vasily actually hit such a small target deliberately, or was it partially lucky? These questions are natural. Extraordinary claims should invite scrutiny. The evidence, however, is compelling. Multiple eyewitnesses confirmed the basic facts. German records documented the loss of their command structure in that sector at that time. The tactical outcome, the halted assault, is indisputable. The exact details may have variations depending on who's telling the story, but the core narrative is supported by documentation. More importantly, the technical feasibility has been verified. Modern snipers, using period-appropriate equipment and ammunition, have demonstrated that such a shot, while extremely difficult, is possible under the right conditions. It requires exceptional skill, favorable circumstances, and, yes, a measure of luck. But it's not impossible. Improbable, certainly, but not impossible. This distinction between impossible and improbable is crucial. If the shot were truly impossible, it would have been just luck, a random occurrence without meaning. But because it was improbable, but achievable through skill, it represents something more. It represents human capability pushed to its limits and succeeding. The 5 minutes that followed that first shot were, in some ways, even more impressive than the shot itself. Maintaining accuracy, making rapid target selection decisions, managing ammunition, all while under the stress of active combat, requires a different set of skills. It's one thing to make a perfect shot under controlled conditions. It's entirely different to maintain performance as a situation unfolds chaotically around you. Vasily's ability to transition immediately from the precision required for the fuel canister shot to rapid engagement of multiple targets showed his versatility. He wasn't just a specialist capable of one type of shot. He was a complete marksman who could adapt his approach to changing circumstances. This flexibility is what made him truly dangerous. In the final analysis, what happened that November morning in Stalingrad was a confluence of preparation, opportunity, skill, and determination. Remove any one of those elements, and the outcome might have been different. But all four came together in those critical moments, resulting in one of the most remarkable displays of marksmanship in military history. The soldiers who fought alongside Vasily that day, who held the line while he worked, who provided covering fire during the German retreat, they were all part of the story. Individual excellence enabled by collective effort, collective survival enabled by individual excellence. This symbiosis defines successful military operations. As the sun set on that battlefield, as the temperature dropped even further, and soldiers on both sides tried to find whatever warmth they could, Vasily cleaned his rifle, checked his ammunition, and prepared for whatever the next day would bring. He didn't celebrate, he didn't boast. He simply did what needed to be done and prepared to do it again. That professionalism, that steady reliability, might be his greatest legacy. The impossible shot demonstrated exceptional skill, but his consistent performance day after day, engagement after engagement, showed exceptional character. Anyone can have one great moment. Sustaining excellence over time requires something deeper. The impact of that single shot rippled far beyond that immediate battlefield. It became a teaching tool, a morale booster, a psychological weapon, and ultimately a legend that has endured for over 8 decades. Not bad for 2 seconds of bullet flight. Today, when military instructors teach advanced marksmanship, when they discuss what's possible at extended ranges, when they emphasize the mental aspects of sniping, Vasili's story comes up. It's become a benchmark, a standard against which other achievements are measured. To understand modern sniping, you must understand what happened on that frozen morning in Stalingrad. The impossible shot that stopped a platoon, that redefined marksmanship, that changed the course of a battle, that inspired generations of marksmen. It all came down to one man, one rifle. And 5 minutes that proved impossible is just another word for things we haven't done yet. In war, as in life, we are defined by the moments when we are most tested. Vasily Grigorievich had his moment, and he met it with skill, courage, and an impossible shot that became possible through sheer mastery of his craft. The bullet may have traveled for only 2 seconds, but its impact echoes through history, a reminder that excellence knows no limits, that skill properly applied can overcome any odds, and that sometimes, just sometimes, one person really can change everything. The story of the impossible shot is more than a tale of military prowess. It's a testament to human potential, to what becomes possible when preparation meets opportunity, when skill meets courage, when the impossible is attempted anyway. Vasily didn't know if he could make that shot. He just knew he had to try. And in trying, in succeeding against all probability, he showed us all what's possible when we push beyond perceived limitations. That's the true legacy of those 5 minutes in November 1942. Not just a military victory, not just an impressive shot, but a lesson in human capability that continues to inspire and instruct decades later. In a war filled with darkness, it was a moment of light. In a battle defined by chaos, it was a moment of perfect precision. In a world that often seems impossible to navigate, it was proof that impossible is just a starting point for those with the skill and courage to go beyond.